So today's topic, 5 good ideas on engaging your board effectively, is a topic that is dear to my heart. Now, I should tell you that this is not a session on board governance 101, but is focused very specifically on developing and maintaining an engaged board. Our theory is that an engaged board will be effective at their governance role, will enjoy and value their connection with the organization, and will be enthusiastic champions for the cause. Now, what do we mean by engaged? Dictionary definitions are wide and varied, including establish a meaningful contact or connection with, bring weapons together preparatory to fighting, and to enter into combat with an enemy. Well, I'm pleased to assure you that we will be using a more peaceable definition today. One that I think was really good is included in one of the readings that we've recommended. And it goes like this. Engagement is inspiring passion in someone so they will want to take action. Engagement is inspiring passion in someone so they will want to take action. So that's our working definition for today. As Alan mentioned, in the past 25 years, I have had the honor of serving on or supporting the work of a number of boards in Ontario's not-for-profit sector. And I will be making a reference in my remarks to some of the boards I've served on, including Casey House Hospice, Bridgepoint Health, and Centennial College. I'll also be making references to the 3 wonderful boards that I have supported as a staff member: United Way Toronto, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and today's Sick Kids Foundation. So let's start with the first idea, and let's start at the very beginning of the process: recruitment. Because if you recruit board members whom you truly believe will become engaged members, that's probably half the battle, isn't it? I've been involved with many board nomination processes over the years, and I've seen many impressive and thoughtful matrices where we plot skills and experiences and do a really good job by and large. So most of those will work extremely well. An area I have not seen getting as much consideration is the whole question of engagement. So at the recruitment stage, I would suggest there are 3 key questions in this area. 1, and that's really quite simple. Does the person have the time to take on the role? 2, does he or she have a strong connection to the cause? And 3, are we being completely transparent with them about the requirements of the role and our expectations? So allow me to share a really unfortunate example of recruitment. It does involve me, and it was some 30 years ago, so I'm hoping that the statute of limitations will have worn out. So many years ago, I belonged to a community theatre group. And the group was a tenant in a city-owned community centre. We were having the group was having a really difficult time with a really poorly run centre. And we figured, well, what we needed to do was to get a member on the board. If we could get a member on the board, we could at least have some influence. So a bunch of us went down to the annual general meeting with a plan to elect a member to the board. Well, we get there, and there's the 2 city councillors and about 6 other people in the room, and us. So as you can sort of imagine what would happen. They needed to elect a board. There weren't enough people there. The city councillors turned to us and said, would you like to be on the board? So in a matter of minutes, 5 of us were suddenly on this board of directors. We were recruited on the spot by 2 city councillors. Needless to say, we ended up serving 3 years on this board with really, frankly, an interest in only one small program at the centre, not a lot of interest in what else was happening at the community centre. A really unfortunate example of recruitment. On the flip side, fast forward to today, and I'm really pleased to say that Sick Kids Foundation does a really excellent job of considering potential engagement before a potential board member is approached. Families who've had contact with sick kids usually come away with feeling passionate about the experience. So we're really fortunate to have a terrific pool of potentially engaged board candidates. So my first good idea is, for an engaged board, assess and discuss a potential board member's capacity to become passionately engaged. Moving then to the second step, orientation. I have to admit that this is an area that I've struggled with somewhat over the years, both as a board member and as a staff person supporting board orientation. Do you hold a board orientation session before or after the first meeting of the year? Do you make it comprehensive, or do you only touch on the key points? Can you assume that board members will read the board orientation manual that you give them, or should you actually walk them through it, knowing how busy everyone is? So while I admit that I'm still struggling with this area, here are 3 observations after 25 years of board orientation processes. 1, and this is my most important point, board orientation can't be done in a day. One of the achievements that I was particularly proud of at the Ontario Trillium Foundation was that we gave board members a year-long orientation schedule. That's right, it was a full year of activities, including attending a community grant review team meeting, a grantee site visit, a local media announcement, and a finance committee meeting, amongst other things. Spaced over a year, the activities did not seem too onerous, and together they provided a comprehensive view of the organization. That's point 1. 2, providing a strong connection to the course, again, is essential. At Centennial College, I met students at my first orientation meeting. It may sound obvious, but it really provided a strong point of connection from day 1, and was one of those things that could very easily have been overlooked. At Sick Kids, we always try to take board members to provide them with a behind-the-scenes tour of the hospital, something that they really enjoy. And the one time that we actually ran out of time and had to do that very quickly, we had a couple of people who were not so happy about that experience. So number 2, provide that strong connection to the cause. And number 3, pairing up with a board buddy and a staff buddy is a model that I've seen work very well. At Casey House Hospice, a small but complex organization, I would not have grasped the essence of the place without a staff buddy in my first year. So the second idea is plan an orientation schedule that's comprehensive and is more than a single event. My third area relates to risk. Too often in the not-for-profit sector, I've encountered board attitudes that are overly cautious about risk. And I'm sure you have too. I've often heard sentiments such as, we should only invest in GICs to be on the safe side. Or we shouldn't make this grant, should make a grant to this program because it's new and unproven. While cautions like that can often be noble, I think we would all agree that without risk, there would be no progress. Indeed, every organization takes on risk. The moment you open an office, you turn on your lights, you hire your first staff person, provides program to your first client, we are assuming risk. So I would argue that the role of the board is to acknowledge and encourage and even to celebrate risk, but to do it in a managed way. One of my best examples of managed risk was at the board of Bridgepoint Active Health. Today, that wonderful glass-encased world-class facility at the bottom of the Don Valley that many of us see every day driving on the Don Valley is something that we can all be proud of. But 8 years ago, when it was just a dream, it seemed like an impossible challenge, particularly to an organization that was to take on a financial risk and a financial commitment of that degree for a very small hospital. But step by step, the board and senior management walked our way through that risk, not the least of which was that the organization, which had almost no history of fundraising, had to raise millions of dollars as part of our local share. During those early years, I gained enormous respect for my fellow board colleagues and for the CEO at Bridgepoint. The board at Sick Kids Foundation is another great example because they have encouraged management to name innovation as an organizational value. And of course, innovation cannot happen without risk. So as an organization that is determined to be a leader in the sector, we take on a range of risks from new fundraising vehicles to new technologies and new events. With each, we work to ensure that we understand the risks and how they should be mitigated. The board has been actively engaged and has requested from our CEO a semi-annual report on innovation. I should mention that my CEO, Ted Garrard, is in the room, so sorry, but singular, thank you for being here. And for the board, getting involved in the discussion has resulted in some of the most meaty boardroom discussions, which in turn keep board members engaged. So my third idea for an engaged board, the board should encourage and manage and celebrate rather than avoid risk. So my fourth area is another one that I have to admit I've struggled with over the years, and that's the importance of planning for meaningful board dialogue. I think back to my United Way days, when as a CFO, I used to love to put together complex financial presentations that looked really impressive on the screen. At least I thought they looked impressive on the screen. But it took me a while to realize that while the presentations may indeed have been impressive, they didn't really contribute to board engagement. We had an interesting challenge at the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and Helen Burston, who was the board chair at the time, is here today. Thank you, Helen. When the board decided, under Helen's leadership, to get out of the business of approving grants and said that they would rather focus on strategy. You can imagine the shock that was to us. So we were used to boards approving grants. At every board meeting, the board got 2 board binders about that thick, Helen. So they got about that much paper at every meeting. So the board would flip through the binder. They would pick 4 or 5 or 6 grants that they wanted to debate. That good, meaningful, thoughtful debate. These were thoughtful people. And before you knew it, the board meeting was over and the business of the meeting was done. Now in the new scenario, they wanted to discuss strategy. We had to help shape and guide strategic discussions, providing the background and information needed, and provide real options for debate. Much more challenging to plan from a staff perspective. But you know what? The evaluations of board engagement completely went through the roof. Suddenly, the board realized this is the kind of business we want to be in. We were not here to discuss individual grants one by one. So my fourth area is actively plan for board dialogue at every meeting. The meetings need to be more than great presentations. I guess we can still sneak in those great presentations when we want to. And my fifth idea for board engagement involves getting out of the boardroom and, yes, having fun. There is, of course, a lot of business that can only be done in the boardroom. But facilitating out-of-boardroom experiences really does add to engagement. At Centennial College, they took us once to a classroom in the automotive building. It wasn't the most comfortable, but we got to see firsthand one of the college's lead programs. At Bridgepoint, there were frequent opportunities to walk around and meet with hospital patients. At Sick Kids, and this happened before my time, but board members still talk about the time years ago where there was a board retreat that included a cooking class. And the board members actually engaged in chopping vegetables and creating salads together. A great collaborative engagement experience. At the Ontario Trillium Foundation, we were able to take board members to a different Ontario community once a year, where we toured programs that were funded by the foundation. I'll never forget sitting on a bumpy yellow school bus, driving through the back roads of rural Ontario, and noticing otherwise serious board members chatting and laughing with their colleagues. Needless to say, the experience contributed hugely to board engagement. So my fifth idea is look for opportunities to get out of the boardroom and also look for fun. Board governance is an imperfect combination of art and science. The science part covers all the regulatory and legal activities that are essential to good governance. The art part is made up of all the other things we do as board members and as management to ensure that our critically important organizations in the sector are governed with thoughtfulness, with passion, with engagement, and yes, even with some fun. Thank you. It's now my great pleasure to introduce my colleagues on the panel. Each of them is an individual whom I have known for many years. In some cases, we won't admit how many years, but leaders in the sector each. So Jini Stolk is today the chair of the Ontario Nonprofit Network, is a research fellow at the Toronto Arts Council, and for many years a leader in the arts sector. Earl Miller, who is the director at Mars, Director of Partnership at Mars, and recently became president of West Neighbourhood House, formerly St. Christopher House, and Jehad Aliweiwi, who recently took over as executive director of the Laidlaw Foundation and served for many years before that as executive director of Thorncliffe Neighbourhood Office. Thank you for joining us. So we've been asked to share our mics, mainly so that people online can hear us, so we'll hand them back and forth. And to kick off with, because I know that you are a group that is who will each have your opinions and don't necessarily mirror those of the person who spoke just before you. Why don't we start with anything that you feel I've missed or anything that you disagree with? Who'd like to go first?
Well, I know I'm supposed to find things to disagree with, but I can't. That was a very, very fabulous, and in fact, I learned a few things about the orientation part of engaging boards. I've got things I could add, but I love the fact that you ended by saying that board leadership, board membership, board management from the CEO side is a combination of art and science, because it's so true. You can read all you want about how boards run, how boards should run, but it really does, in some ways, come down to the personal relationships and the feeling of passion and enabling people to bring that passion to the work that they're doing as volunteers. I think you learn that over time.
Yeah, I think I have the same feeling about your presentation. It was marvelous. What I would add is, just based on my own experience around being on a board, is that people also want to grow as volunteers. It's not just about giving, and I think that part of our experience is about learning. And so many of us are passionate to begin with, and that's why we're selected, but we also want to learn more about the organization or what it does or what it actually means to be a good leader. And so one of the things I would add is that in recruiting board members and in the active job of orienting them, think about the person and think about what they might want to grow. And that may mean that it's the CEO or executive director or the committee chair or the board chair who needs to have a kind of a one-on-one, a more personalized connection with the person to find out what it is they want. Because we often assume that people want to be on boards because they want to give, and I think that's true, but they also want to get. And I don't think there should be any shame in that whatsoever. But if that's true, let's find out what that is so that we can position the person properly within the board to be able to get what they want as well as give what they can.
Well, there's not much left to say. But Robin, you've really set it up quite well. But I think to me there are three elements that boards and board engagement, and especially the relationship with the chief executive, is really the key. And to Jenny's point, it's really about relationships, dynamism, and what people bring and what they expect to get. So I think the recruitment part is really key. And I think one of the fundamental things that are missing in my view is that the recruitment of board members really tend to revolve around immediate needs of a board and also the passion of someone who's coming forward and volunteering. But it has rarely been around a matrix of skills and expertise that a board identifies and tailors the recruitment accordingly. And that's really one of the biggest, in my view, failing of the classic governance model, is that recruitment is rarely consistent or connected to a strategy that the board identifies that we need expertise in this area and that area. I mean, every board wants a lawyer and a fundraiser, and that's really, part of the challenge. The other thing, I totally agree, Robin, about orientation, and that is one of the challenges as well. Is that the expectation is to have a binder at the first board meeting after the AGM, and it's a one shot, and that's it. If you got it, you got it. You didn't get it, you didn't get it. That's it. But I think orientation is really, it has to be rethought, and the governance models are they're really quite old and need to be changed. And I think we really need to think of orientation a little differently and how to engage board members. The last thing is, I'm a big fan of fun, and I saw the value of fun and how people who got along and enjoyed each other's company actually worked very well and produced effective strategies.
Well, let's pick up on that last point, the one of fun, because I was aware in giving the Ontario Trillium Foundation example that that was an expensive program. I mean, we would actually take our board, I mean, Earl, you're still on the OTF board, I think, so we would take the board to Thunder Bay or even London, even Kitchener. It's still involved overnight accommodation, still involved, so it's not something that everyone can do. Do you have examples that may be less costly, but still as fun and as engaging that you can share?
I think that we would all be great on a board because we seem to have that commitment to fun. I mean, I really do think that because somebody is volunteering with your organization, you're absolutely right. They are doing it both for a belief in a community, but they're also doing it for personal growth, and because they want to. They want a chance to express their own commitments and their own feelings about community and the world and how it should be. Fun is the way people come together and bond. So the arts are great at celebrating parties, events. And to me, that's the way you bring people together and create a board rather than 8 or 10 separate people who come together with separate perspectives. A board really is, when it functions well, is functioning not as 10 very, very different people just having a conversation. They're bonded together around the mission and around the vision. And so things like events and barbecues and parties and getting together at people's houses for dinner, opening up a bottle of champagne if you've just met your $1 million fundraising goal. All of those things I think are really, really important.
And I guess can be Ontario champagne, doesn't have to be French.
It must be Ontario champagne.
I want to be on your board. Wow, sounds like
Sounds like it. I think you're going to get some volunteers.
Partay. I think it has to fit the organization that you're a part of. I think the first field trip that we had at the OTF, just the penny just dropped for me, because the reality is you're providing grants to communities that you've never ever seen, to people who you don't know what happened with the money. In a way, it's kind of a remote accountability, and to actually go up to the senior's house and see how they revamp the kitchen and how people have access to a building that is a cornerstone of the community. So I think in the case of the OTF, it was absolutely essential that we did these things so that people who were making decision could connect with the outcome. And I think that's a guiding message that I would have with these kinds of things. Try and do something that engages people, but that's a fit with your organization. So I'm the president of West Neighbourhood House. Our neighborhood is transforming amazingly. So what did we do? We went out for pizza at one of the local restaurants, and we realized just by walking the street how the neighborhood was becoming gentrified and how different restaurants were having an impact on the community. And that change is really important to us because, as you'll know, we were formerly called St. Christopher House, and the first question I get people is, why did you change your name?
Why did you change your name?
Well, it's partly because our organization is 102 years old. And in that time, the neighborhood has transformed tremendously. And the people who were getting service from us were saying, is this a religious organization? And what we found is that many of the people who are coming into our community and to whom we provided service were not Christians. And yet they still had a belief simply based on our name that we were a sectarian organization that, because it was 100 years old, probably had 100-year-old values. Our values have changed a lot over the course of 100 years. And to those people who knew us as St. Christopher House, our values are contemporary, they're dynamic, and they reflect the change of the community. We are an anchor in the West End, and that's why we changed our name to West. We didn't want to alienate the people who had always known us as St. Christopher House and loved us for that reason. But we felt that we could explain that to them in view of the change, because one of the things they liked about us is that we were responsive to a community that was changing. Well, part of that was the response. But he also didn't want to offend and prevent people from actually getting service, particularly people who needed it, because they were afraid of who we are just by our name. So,
Earl,
anybody
can
in
I
this
jump-
room.
Can I jump in on the issue of board governance and this issue?
Sure.
Because it is a very interesting governance issue. So I'm assuming that the board was very engaged in this change.
Absolutely.
And
Took us over a year.
And I'm assuming that there were different opinions expressed, and different because I'm sure some people, I'm assuming, were attached to the historical name and so on. Can you give us a bit of a flavor from a board engagement perspective of this discussion?
Sure. What's the risk? For people who've always known us as St. Christopher House, why are we changing our name? They will be offended. How do we really know that people are concerned about religion? Will our fundraisers drop us because they think this is a change which is unwelcome? Will people see the name West and go, what the heck does that mean? Right? So those are the kind of discussions that we have.
Good. That's helpful. Thank you. So we're talking about
Talking about fun.
About fun still.
Well, I think part of it is in recruitment. I think every board should make sure when they design the recruitment for a board chair to make sure that they have a big house or a cottage. You know, I served under a board chair who was really quite committed to the organization. He was an expert in board governance and charities, but he really understood the value of bringing the board once a year to his house and talking both socially and personally about their families, but also about the organization and what's the vision moving forward. And he made a point of doing it actually 2 weeks after Christmas or 2 weeks after New Year's. He says everybody's really needs a party after Christmas and New Year's, so I think that worked well. So it's as simple as being deliberate about it.
Let's move to the issue. I think a couple of you touched on the issue of that I did not cover in my 5 points of board engagement. That's the issue of the relationship between the CEO and the board and the board chair. Would any of you like to expand on that because clearly from picking up on a couple of those comments, I think I was hearing that there was a feel that that's an important consideration for board engagement.
Yeah, since I have the microphone, so I can start. I think that's one of the key issues. If you get this right, you really have a lot of things figured out and fairly straightforward. The relationship between the executive director, the CEO, and the board chair is key, and by extension, with the board. So one of the practices that I've learned serving with Bill Pashby, who was the board chair at Thorncliffe for a few years when I was there, is that the practice of a week or 10 days before the board meeting, he would come and would have a breakfast or lunch and just talk about the agenda. So there are no surprises, but also where do I stand on each item or each agenda issue? Where are the potentials? Where are the controversies and the decisions items? And how do we present and plan a meeting? So that dynamic and that relationship is important. But also it has to be really clearly spelled out and explained. And again, it cannot be done in an orientation session. Really be embedded in the practices of a board. That the relationship between the staff and the senior members of the staff and the board is key. And often, most successful organizations don't get this right. The organization that are challenged get this wrong.
I think it is also extremely important that they have a good relationship, partly because I think the culture of the organization often determines whether or not board members feel comfortable. I think of the experience where I was not comfortable on the board, and that was a feeling where the organization was completely run by the staff, and that the board was essentially a rubber stamp. It was a very large board, but I realized that engagement is part because people believe that they belong, that their voice will be heard, and that there's an opportunity for them to give voice and be listened to, even if their views are controversial. And I think the board chair and the CEO have a huge role in creating a climate of welcomeness. Certainly I felt that on the board when Helen was the chair at the OTF, and I have felt it on many other boards. So I think that for leaders to acknowledge their role in creating a supportive climate and a positive culture, that's very, very important. Leadership is the key.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been an advocate of writing it down, and so the separate and mutual roles of board and staff. I think it's important to write that down, and I began developing that way back in my early foolish, younger experience working with boards, but it's something that developed over time to the point where, and actually personal fulfillment and fun is on that list. But I think the mutuality, but the separateness of the responsibilities is something that that can and should be articulated on paper, and then, because what you're really looking for is a mutually respectful professional relationship between CEO and board chair. Since we're looking for a little bit of controversy, I will say that when I was at Creative Trust working with 22 arts organizations and helping them often with governance issues, some of those governance issues were around board members, or sometimes in particular a board chair, who for various reasons had been there too long, very frequently, didn't respect, didn't kind of understand the situation. The relationship was sticky, but it didn't seem like it was something that could easily be worked out. That's where things get really tough. And I always think a little bit of outside mentorship and coaching is helpful for any CEO in that position. But it's the relationship then with the individual board members becomes even more important, because you want to make sure that there are people where if you have difficulty in a relationship or in a conversation with the board chair, that there are people that you can and do talk to in a very open and honest way. Succession. We really didn't talk about succession, but sometimes people shouldn't be allowed to stay too long, because it's not good for them and it's not good for the organization. These can be tricky conversations and tricky working things out, but it's important to think about succession.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, and then after that, I'm going to open it up for a few minutes, and so if you, we will take a few questions now, and before we go to the table discussions. But Earl, go ahead.
Just some practical suggestions in terms of the board CEO relationship. I mean, one thing I would suggest is useful is if you're a chair, is to have a touch base with your CEO at least twice a month or something like that. Not only just to talk about the agenda, but just to talk about issues. The other thing is, I think as CEO, it's important for you to tell stories. Tell stories about what your organization actually does and what it's accomplished. I find that if you, for example, have board meetings once a month and there's supposed to be a chair's report, include within it a story of service that, first of all, tells people what exactly the organization has done that's made a difference in people's lives. I find that has amazing impact. And it's also a good teaching tool from a board member, particularly for new board members who aren't really sure of what impact the organization is having, when you tell them a story. The third thing I would suggest is be proud of your staff and give them a chance to educate board members. That means give presentations, show their expertise. That does two things. One, it makes board members feel enormously confident that the organization is in good hands when they're not at a board meeting. And the second thing is it creates pride in staff that they can present to the board and explain to something that's meaningful. So it's a real win. So those are three practical tips that I would offer as ways of sort of helping your organization move forward.